Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to a very special Sikh Network show where we're talking about the census 2021 and the need for a separate Sikh tick box in the ethnic category, so separate ethnic tick box in the census in 2021. That decision, the reason we're talking about today, that decision will be made in 2018 by the Office of National Statistics, who are responsible for the census. And the Sikh Network, along with the Sikh Federation, many Sikh organisations, the Sikh Council, 112 Gurdwara across the UK, and many of you watching who have both been on both sides of being discriminated potentially, but also very supportive of this, have been campaigning for many years, 2 decades that we talked about before the break, the campaign started. We are now at a pivotal point in this campaign in that the Office of National Statistics will make its decision and issue its white paper to Parliament later this year. And in that it will recommend whether the Sikhs will get an ethnic tick box or not. And we're now going to move on to the reasons why. Why is it so important to have this in? Like we mentioned earlier, that this may be the last census. And after this, what we have seen is that various government departments are doing analysis. And we've had the race audit. We've also had the hate crime action plan. So the Prime Minister kicked off the race audit across all of government departments, 200 I think government departments. The hate crime action plan, many other reporting mechanisms that have come off the back of inquiries, and other things that are happening in society have resulted and meant that we need better data. So this is something that's going to continue. And I think, why is it, I mean, we've talked about discrimination as a key factor. Share with us at times from your professional experience, being 30 odd years as a director of the National Audit Office. And so in essence, you audit the government and these government departments. So you're speaking from a position of knowledge and experience as opposed to anecdotal hearsay. Tell us about what are some of the real examples of what discrimination happens in ordinary Sikhs could experience with them not being identified as Sikhs.
So let me use a personal example at work. So at work, when I completed the ethnicity box, there was no Sikh box because they're following the census categories. So I went to ticked other and wrote Sikh, even at work. And the head of HR called me up a few months later and said, "Devinderjeet, you're not Chinese, are you?" I said, "No, I'm not Chinese. Look at what I wrote." And what they'd done is, because there were so few probably that ticked other and wrote something, they just lumped them in with Chinese.
Right.
That shows you that if that person hadn't called me because I was senior, I was a director, and they could easily tell that I wasn't fitting one of the categories, that's what happens. You get lost. You get lost in those 40,000 bodies. Sikhs are lost. I don't know what they're labelled as. They could be labelled as Chinese, they could be labelled as Indian, as Pakistani, who knows?
It comes back to that same thing. If, as a minority, and in your case there was only very few minorities that ticked other, effectively you then become insignificant, and they will put you in anywhere to round up the numbers, but actually do nothing with.
But before we move on to the issue of why is it so important, there's one myth that we have to knock on its head, which is, we talked about Mandla versus Lee case, and those law lords said, we were more than a religion. We're a way of life, right? We're a panth, we're a gom. And some people, and they are a minority, argue that in 1983, the only protection we could get was under the race laws, because there was no such thing as religious discrimination. Well, let's just blow that myth up. In 2003, law was introduced on religious discrimination. It's the first time this country had laws where all the religions were protected in 2003. And then we had the Equality Act 2006, before the Equality Act 2010. What do we have in between? Sarika's Gada case. Went to the High Court. Liberty fought that case. We were involved. And what did those High Court judges decide? They looked back at the Mandla versus Lee case. Not at the 2003 religious discrimination laws, not at the Equality Act 2006. Their ruling, which anyone can look up, is Sarika won her case on the basis of indirect discrimination as an ethnic group.
Race discrimination.
Race discrimination.
I think that's really important because, again, people think about, oh, it was only for protection for a specific thing. It wasn't to have a greater application. Well, actually, again, those people that claim that are causing further discrimination against Sikhs, because this is about the protection of our kakar. It was about the identity that we talked about. And people who aren't adorning the identity will never understand these things. And if we talk about the Kara, the Sakira Singh case was the Kara at school. And as you said, the decision was that had you fought it on the grounds of religious discrimination, you may not have won that.
Well, the judges, because it was fought under religious discrimination and race discrimination, and did not win under religious discrimination. And the reason is, and this is where what I would call these people that put theological arguments do not see the practical reality of this. Sarika's mother was a Hindu. Sarika's father was a Christian. He died, unfortunately. His mother remarried Satnam Singh. That was her connection to Sikhi. She went to Darbar Sahib. She started wearing her kada. Now, those people arguing today, the people like Sarika are not a Sikh. What right have they got to judge a 14-year-old girl that says, I want to wear my kada to school? She won the case. Now, if she had tried to just fight that case on the basis of religious discrimination, these things would have come up. That she doesn't keep the other kakar. And the whole point
then they would have tested her religious practice. And actually what would have happened was, by people, and this is the danger of people who are either not of the Sikh faith or following the Sikh faith fully, or take a different view, by diminishing the Mandla versus Lee decision or lessening it, they risk imposing precedent on effective restriction of other kakars. Because had we not had that, the kakara case, then schools would have been open season to stop anyone wearing a kara, and then the karpan, and then the dastar potentially in schools.
And look at the other faiths and cases that went to court around Sarika's time. Headscarf, hijab, lost in the courts. Despite religious discrimination laws, the cross case, lost in the courts. That had to go to the European Court for Human Rights. That British Airways worker who wanted to wear the cross. So in other words, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, they've lost in the courts because they don't have this protection.
I guess they then come to their symbols of your faith, and under religion they were deemed whether you can choose or not to choose. Whereas we've always said that articles of faith, the Panj Kakar, are integral to Sikhi, and they are part of our ethnic faith and nationhood together. And that is the foundation piece of the legislation, why we use the legislation as well. I mean, so just to come back to some of we've talked about some of the case law, Sakira cases and so on, but again, we've used the Mandla versus case in many school cases where we get people, and that's more ignorant and informed, where they will say, well, you can't wear this for health and safety. We had a case very recently with another kara and a karpan in schools, and we've overcome those. But going back to discrimination, because ultimately, and I'll quote retired Gurmukh Singh OBE here, who said, if you're not counted, you don't count. And a lot of people say, well, where's the evidence? But the point is, we're not counted. There is no data on Sikhs.
There is no evidence, therefore that's discrimination.
Exactly. And and this is the point, it's the most obvious point, in that because we're not counted, no one can tell, and this really came out in the Prime Minister's race audit, when they did a race audit across 200 government departments to see at what level, what was the diversity of government and all its employees. And in that, when we met with Zamila, who's from the Cabinet Office, who was responsible for the audit, we asked her, would Sikhs be included in this? And she talked about the process, and she mentioned that actually they're using the Census 2011 categories, on which, because at the same time we were talking to them, we knew that Sikhs wouldn't be counted. And we raised that with her, and she fully acknowledged that actually government is open to discrimination and a legal challenge because of the Mandla versus Lee case, but they can only use data from an audit perspective, looking historically, so they had to have the data available. And in that audit, and that's publicly available, it's on the Cabinet Office website, Sikhs are excluded. So we now have data across government of all the employees at what level, excluding Sikhs. And what came out of that was a data gap, that highest levels of government identified that the Sikhs were a genuine data gap, and the only way that data gap could be addressed would be by changing the ethnic categories and census. And the reason I want to make this point is because many people have said there is data available.
Yeah.
There's religious data available. People who do research or academics have said there's data available on Sikhs. Well, actually, over 320 data reference points were used in compiling the race audit. That's 300 different data points plus, with all of government's resources. So not the Sikh network, not a small group, not a individual think tank. Government in its whole might. You looked at every single data point because they did not want to be exposed. They didn't want to have gaps. They could not find any source data to then report on Sikhs. So when people say there was data available, it's simply not true. There isn't data substantial that is statistically relevant and valid to be used at this level.
But I think the important thing to emphasise is when Theresa May became Prime Minister, she stood outside 10 Downing Street in August 2016 and said, because of these differences the Brexit vote had identified, she was going to have this annual race disparity audit. The important word is race. Because as soon as you say race, it doesn't mean religion. And therefore, we knew straight away, because when we said those 40,000 public bodies do not monitor Sikhs, it's not surprising central government departments, of which there's 17, and all the agencies, and there's about 400 altogether in government, central government, is none of them collect any data on Sikhs, and therefore there's nothing in the race disparity audit, and that will happen every year until we get that ethnic tick box and influence them.
And just put that into a real example. So, we've worked in industry, and again, I've always ticked other and Sikh. In professional consulting, I've done that. And actually what that means is, for anybody out there who had a job in government or anywhere else in the private sector or any other department, that as a Sikh, and let's talk about government because it's where the race audit is happening annually, if you work in government, you will never be on any statistics to say at what level, how many Sikhs we have at various bands, at various levels, in various departments. The Home Office, the Foreign Office, Department of Health, Department of Justice, all these ministries, how many Sikhs do we have in each of these fields? We'll never know that. We will know how many Indians, how many Pakistanis, how many Bangladeshis, how many black, mixed, white, or everything else. We will never know how many Sikhs there are. Arabs, Irish travellers, we will even know. And that's the thing, they're not a race, they're not an ethnicity, but we will know them because they're a category that was put in last time. But we won't know Sikhs. So we won't know if you, for example, your career goes forward and some others hit a ceiling or feel discriminated against. This audit, which sole purpose is to look at race discrimination and disparity, will never indicate where Sikhs are being stopped or restricted at a particular level in terms of further progression.
The only thing is, it goes much beyond that, because the easiest one you could talk about is employment, right? So if you work in the civil service, this affects you. But it affects us, every single one of us, doesn't matter what job you do, because central government in its entirety, local government in its entirety, the schools, hospitals, can ignore Sikhs. That's what it boils down to. So this is the whole point. Employment is very specific, but it's about provision of public services, which goes back to 18 years we've had of this, since the 2000 Act. So when the Equality Act 2010 came in, you are still protected as Sikhs under both religion and race. And people should never forget that. And I think it's worth, in the short time we've got, talk about what we've done in the last few years, just to...
Yeah, I think just before we move on, I think the provision of services is vitally important, because we talk about welfare, we talk about housing, we talk about policing, we touched upon recent hate crime with the Hate Crime Action Plan. As a Sikh, with a visible Sikh identity, we've lived with religious hatred and hate crimes and racism. It's just been part and parcel of life in the UK. If you was to report it, there is no way that you could report that as a Sikh hate crime, because your categories are not identified.
The difficulty with hate crime is that the Hate Crime Action Plan was based around religions. And everything we've talked about is based around ethnicity. So until that Hate Action Plan came out 2 years ago now, a year ago actually, 2017, is that in a way what we're saying is we were overlooked in that as a religion as well.
As well as
Because they focused largely on Muslims
Yeah.
and Jews, and to some degree Christians. They completely glossed over specific cases, and we know we've got evidence that they glossed over the case of the Sikh dentist attacked in North Wales, in Tesco. Yeah. They actually took it out because they didn't want to talk about Sikhs being the victims of hate crime. Right. And so people need to realise that actually you have greater rights as a race and as an ethnic group because there's a legal requirement. Right. Religion and what data is collected on religion, I think anyone that works in any public sector bodies will know that collecting information on ethnic groups has been there because of the census.
And it's mandatory.
And because the religious question, people feel that that's personal to you, you don't have to answer that question in census.
Just not used.
And therefore, lots of public bodies do not collect that information.
And it's just not available. And this is what we come back to actually what data was available. It's just not there. Yes, you might tick a box, but it's not used for anything. No. And we also looked about in terms of all of the services that your local government provide and how they look at your needs if you went into hospital, how many Sikhs required treatment, what were the needs of Sikhs that go into hospital, whether it's protection for the Kakars, how to treat Sikhs, specific illnesses that are down specific to Sikhs. None of that information is collected, and this is what we talk about. All those services, they are provided based on that data, and we are completely excluded and discriminated against on that basis. We also touch on two things. One is about accurate counting. Census, we talked about right at the start, is about the counting of data and getting an understanding of the population. And in 2011, the official Sikh figures from the census was 438,000. That was basically using the religious question, which was, again, not mandatory, it's optional. And more than 20% is the gap in that questionnaire. And they applied some sort of statistical balancing to that and then issued that number. Now we've well known, certainly since then, that number is really underrepresented. And there were specific cases like Leicester and Gravesend where the data in the census did not match electoral roll or real life on the ground data.
Independent surveys carried out by
that people had. So there is a huge issue around accuracy of the counting and that undermines the number. But then it comes down to the equality issue of identity. I'll touch on here the UK Sikh survey that the Sikh Network launched in 2016, surveyed 4,500 Sikhs across the spectrum and across the age demographic. And two key stats here, 93.5% of those questioned supported a demand for a separate Sikh ethnic tick box. So they said in the census that we support this category. And given the choice, 19 out of 20 preferred to be identified as Sikh rather than Asian or Indian, given the choice of three. And that's what we're talking about in the census, that there'll be a choice. And when you have 19 out of 20 over the age of 16, so relevant for the census, they are telling us that they would rather be identified as Sikh as opposed to Indian or Asian. That is specifically what the questionnaire will be. And that's a matter of choice. Those who identify as Sikh, they are, at the minute, they are completely discriminated and excluded. Those who, with the tick box, they will then be counted. Others who identify themselves as Indian or British Asian or any other type of Asian, they're free to do so. There is no compulsion in this that every single Sikh born into a Sikh family has some connection to Sikhi has to tick an ethnic Sikh tick box. They can tick anything they like. They can then still tick the religious question because that is still staying. There is no question of the religious question moving. But we've also known that people typically will tick religion and Sikh if they are practicing. Those that feel that they're not practicing, their own judgment sometimes don't tick it, which is where the undercount also is impacted by. So there were some of the key things around why the census is so important. We talked about provision of services, we talked about discrimination, we've talked about equality and having no compulsion. Let's talk about sort of where we are now. And I mean, this is the existing framework. There is no other mechanism in government, and anyone who's been talking about we can get it from here, actually reality is for 20 years, they've not come up with any other system. And it's not our responsibility as a minority community to come up with a new process or framework for government. This is the only framework that exists from national to local government. There's no way we're changing it. The decision isn't around changing it to Punjabi ethnicity, because a lot of comment will go on to that. Or is this about what has happened since 2014 and what are the options on the table now?
And I think this is the point, is once you have a census question, they will tinker with it, they won't change it. So they added in the Arab category, the Irish traveller one, and we'll come on to where they are now. So firstly, when the 2010 pre-action letter went, ONS knew we were serious as a community, that the campaign is just now going to get stronger. So let me sort of start at 2011. So 2011, 2001. 2001, 11,000 Sikhs ticked other and wrote Sikh. There were no television channels. In 2011, we had one Sikh television channel. We had more publicity.
No social media still.
And 83,000 Sikhs then ticked other, wrote Sikh. Seva Singh Mandlo on that video clip tells people he fought that case for his son, the importance, he could see the importance of this. And therefore, let's fast forward to 2014. I think it was yourself and Gurneet that met ONS in the summer of 2014. That was the first meeting. We then, later that year, started working on the Sikh Manifesto, published that at the start of January 2015, made it very clear what our demand was, that we wanted an ethnic tick box in the next census, and also to make sure public bodies start to monitor Sikhs as soon as possible. We shouldn't have to wait till the results of the 2021 census. If we get the box in the white paper, there will be a huge amount of pressure on those 40,000 to start now. Why wait? Because you know it's going to potentially happen. So now, what do the ONS do, and what have they always done? So when government want to change things, or when public bodies like ONS and the UK Statistics Authority want to change things, they go through official consultation. So they did consultation in 2015 and 2016. So
two separate consultations.
Two separate consultations, and it's open to individuals, organisations, academics, journalists, anyone can respond.
This was publicised. It was a big campaign. We'd pushed it.
That's right.
Because following the meetings we had with ONS, they told us about the consultation. We covered around responses, etc. So this was widely publicised for people to respond, and everybody had their fair opportunity to respond.
Yeah. So basically, as we said earlier, there were no responses in 2015-16 from any organisation, Sikh or non-Sikh, any individual opposing the Sikh ethnic tick box.
And just to put balance on that, there was responses supported independently from universities. There was responses from health authorities.
Just from users.
Users of data, from Sikh organisations and individuals that all put it in for various different reasons. And again, no opposition official was submitted in either of the consultations.
So basically, the summary of that is the ONS realised there was a need. 83,000 Sikhs had spoken in 2011 as individuals. Now, leading Sikh organisations and people working in health, education were saying there's a need to collect information on Sikhs. So you had both the community saying it and the people that use the data saying it. Therefore, for the first time ever, in 2017, they carried out a test in Wolverhampton and Hounslow. We won't go through detail, writing to 40,000 households in each of those. And the test results showed how the question might work in 2021.
I mean, just on the test, because again, we won't go into detail because we're short on time, but I think it's just important to note that although it was issued for 20,000 households, it was fairly complex. 3 examples were sent in the test. There was no pre-information, no promotion of anything of how you might get it. How many Sikh households actually responded? So
basically, the problem that ONS had with this test is the overall response rate from all households was 13%, 1-3.
So although they sent out 20,000, the response rate was
13%. And that was after they sent out and 2 reminders.
2 reminders, okay.
Right, so it's 13%. Now, the reason why they chose Hounslow and Wolverhampton is roughly 10% of the population is Sikh. So you would expect that if you send it to, that many number of households, that 40,000 households, 4,000 should be Sikh.
Yeah, at least 10%, yeah.
The response rate from Sikh households was 6%. So the overall response was 13, but for Sikhs it was less than half that. So in other words, the test was a failure. They spent £150,000 doing that exercise.
Which told them very little.
And actually, they missed the target population.
Yeah. And I think it's also, although that it was such a small percentage of Sikh responses, I think it was a couple of hundred in real terms. Yeah. Actually, if you look at the whole journey, although the test itself was really a failure, but actually if you looked at the numbers from a trend and a trajectory, they were still indicating an increasing need, maybe not as big because the numbers were too small. So I think just to also add in that we had a number of meetings with ONS. They said they would be doing qualitative and quantitative testing, which we were part of. Yeah. We provided the UK Sikh survey results and analysis and data. They then held a stakeholder meeting to get wider consensus. I think this is where suddenly very small minority voices started to be raised.
The issue before that, Bay, was the reason why it happened is when Breed and Dhananjay got elected in September, when the Times picked up, 140 MPs assigned to less than a week. All of a sudden, these people that had been asleep for like years, forgot the consultation.
Because they'd not been campaigning for. I don't recall anybody of these so-called journalists or academics writing that Sikhs are being discriminated. That they're not, from a race perspective or religious perspective, being counted. I don't recall any of them speaking out against discrimination, saying we need to change. But suddenly they came aboard. So then we had the stakeholder meeting. So we had the 140 MPs that wrote to ONS in a joint letter. We then had the stakeholder group meeting in which, when we did the hand count,
show of hands
was done. I think it was all but two. And the other two that were opposition were for the two options. In the do we do it in a religious question, do we have it nothing, or do we have it in both? Unanimous, bar one, effectively was for that. Separately then there was a meeting with MPs. There's been Gurdwara visits, so ONS has visited a number of Gurdwara. The Gurdwara they visited were, I think, Smethwick. They also visited Gurdwara in Hounslow. Both of those Gurdwaras have responded with supporting the letters, and that's where we are now in the 112 Gurdwara. So independently, 112 Gurdwara have written in to the APPG declaring their support for this. Tell us how that, quickly, because I know we're very short on time, but tell us what was the need for that and how's that going to be used?
Basically, there was two things that the ONS decided in December 2017. Had 55 categories that had requested it. They got them down to 4: Sikhs, Jews, Somali and Roma. They said for Sikhs there were two things they need to do. They need to take further legal advice, which they've been taking since September last year, and they won't share. And the second aspect was they were worried because certain individuals living in their ivory towers had basically started saying, Sikhs don't want this. Theologically, we're just a religion. And as we pointed out, we are clearly not a religion. We're a way of life. We're a panth. And our religious institutions, whether you like it or not, whether you believe in the authority of the Akal Takht or not, they are spoken with one voice, 100%, saying that theological argument that we're just a religion is nonsense. We support the need for an ethnic tick box. And therefore, we've ticked all our boxes as far as ONS are concerned. The question is now, what's going to happen next?
So Sarsanji, we've talked about the journey of the census. We've talked about the importance of how it's used, how it affects every decision and way of life for us as public citizens in this country. We've talked about the legal definition in how 5 independent law lords recognise Sikhi as a sovereign nation as well as a faith. And we've talked about the journey we've gone on with the ONS. And we've tried to, I think we've dispelled a lot of these myths around why it shouldn't happen. I think these voices, albeit a minority, it's still a duty to challenge and put there with the facts. I think 112 Gurdwara speak for 400,000 plus Sangat across the UK, across the spectrum of Sikhs. They have given their voice. We will continue with this campaign until we are successful. With Guru Maharaj's blessings, we'll get there. This is vitally important that you look into this, support the campaign. ONS decisions will come out later this year, and we'll do another show updating you with the latest progress. But whether it's on social media, whether it's through television media, keep supporting that campaign. Understand these issues are vitally important. Sikhs in our history have fought these battles for our benefit. We should not forego these for our future generations. This is about securing the Sikh identity. Ask your MP, write to your MP. When they come to your Gurdwara, ask them what are they doing to support the campaign. So keep that political pressure up. We've by far surpassed the public acceptability test and done way beyond any other minority group in any other changes in the census. So we are confident, but with your support, keep watching KTV, keep supporting KTV who brings us these shows, and we can have these discussions. And on that note, Baji, I think we'll end the show here. Thank you for your time.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ